So thank you, Demeter, and everyone for indulging me in that song, Holy, 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 Holy Cow, is what I always like to think. That one is a good preparation for me to both be serious and take lightly what it is we're here to do today. So since we do have some newcomers, I will introduce myself. My name is April May. That really is my name. I didn't make that up, although it's a great unity name, isn't it? April May. I'm born in March. Just figured I'd get that out of the way in case it was worrying you. Yeah. Middle initial J. Doesn't stand for June, July, or January. And no, nobody else in my family has an unusual name. I was that lucky duck. So I have been here at Unity Center of Light since 2003 on this particular leg of my spiritual journey. I was not a licensed Unity teacher when I first came here, but this community supported me in continuing that journey and achieving that. And it's been an uphill battle ever since. No, I can't imagine life without these spiritual principles, and I think most of you join me in affirming that as well, right? Yeah. And affirmation and gratitude is a great place for us to start. So what I'd like to share is that when I made the commitment to speak today, which I did quite a while ago, the first thing I thought was, why did I do that? What was I thinking? I have a great deal of respect and admiration for the people who do this week after week after week. Getting up here, keeping it real, keeping you entertained and engaged, living life out loud, really, because here's what happens. You make a commitment to do a lesson, and then life works it for you. So what I can tell you is that the second thought I had after what was I thinking was all the right information, support, and revelation will flow to me as needed. Not a bad affirmation, right? That really has proved true for me over the years from the days when I first started speaking in public. Those of you who know me fairly well will probably find this really difficult to believe, but I was painfully shy when I was a child. I mean, I failed a semester of English because I wouldn't get up in front of the class and do a speech. Now there's a turnaround for you, right? Now you can't shut me up. This idea of the affirmation, though, is a brain training that I've been doing with myself since I have been public speaking, of affirming over and over again that what I need and what I am going to be inspired by will continue to come to me. Of course, another thing I would have been very grateful for was if some of it had not waited until 3 o'clock this morning to show up. You know how that goes, right? You do all your advanced prep, and then Spirit says, good morning. Yeah, let's have a chat. You know that idea you had? Not so much. But as this talk continued to work itself in me over the last couple of months, many other gratitudes revealed themselves as well, including for our minister, who I think we all know that we're blessed and fortunate to have, but who also is encouraging of other people to step out into their talents and abilities as well. Another gratitude that was really very much present for me in the last 7 to 8 weeks was working with the Wondrous Encounters Lent class that we had. We were using the fasting and feasting booklet that many of you also were focusing on during the Lent season, and also the Father Richard Rohr book called Wondrous Encounters. And we really had a deep and a transformative experience. That commitment to a group 40-day spiritual practice was a powerful one, and it continued to keep moving me towards today. So I want to say many thanks to that group for taking that journey together. That experience tilled the soil and prepared my heart and mind to take the next step, which was a little light reading that I call the Universal Christ. Just a small topic from a contemplative Franciscan monk, Father Richard Rohr, who was also the author of Wondrous Encounters. And reading that book since we finished the Lent group has also kept moving me towards today. So I feel a lot of gratitude for Father Rohr and his commitment to working with this idea of the universal Christ, which is way unity, you guys. Last but not least, I'd really like to say thank you to all of you for joining me here today. Today would have been a perfect excuse to stay home, right? It's showering out a little bit, you know. It's only April. But I'm grateful. I'm really grateful that you're here. And I'd like for you to affirm that with me. I am grateful. I am grateful. What a great place to start, right? Sets the tone in advance. Well, I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up, anytime I didn't know what a word was or how to spell it, what did I hear? Look it up in the dictionary, right? So when I got the urging to take a look at this idea of dualism as opposed to dichotomy, and my partner Stephen said to me, "Are people going to know what that means?" And I said, well, you know, I didn't really until I went back and looked at it myself. So if you look at the strict dictionary definitions of duality and dichotomy, there may appear to be less difference than I was actually feeling when I was thinking about them. The definition of dichotomy simply says a distinction that may result in a division. We can talk about that more. But a distinction that may result in a division. I like that word may being in there because it leaves us some options, right? But dualism, that's another story altogether. Dualism says, take a deep breath, the view that the world consists of or is explicable in terms of two fundamental principles, such as mind and matter, or good and evil, or black and white. Or as Charles Dickens put it so well, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, and we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. He has more to say about that, which we'll talk about later. So, dichotomy, a distinction that may result in a division. But dualism, that's a whole other ball of wax, isn't it? Black and white, good and evil, oppositional really in its entire approach, structure, and function. This may simply seem like a difference in languaging, semantics, but language is powerful, and how we look at and talk about ourselves, others, our experiences, and our world matters, doesn't it? So let's explore this idea of duality and dichotomy in the context of the time we've just moved through, this Lenten season, and the whole experience through the resurrection of Easter. Looking at that experience on purely a literal level, it would be easy to go to a place that this is all about duality, fasting and feasting, adoration and betrayal, the expression of the most base elements of our humanity and the expression of our highest divinity. The mission of a man of peace and love seemingly ended with cruelty and torture, the death and the resurrection. Truly, this could be viewed at dualism as at its least fine indeed, right? Or, a friend of mine always says, no matter how flat you make a pancake, it's still got two sides, right? But it's still one thing. It's still a pancake, right? Might even be more done on one side than it is on the other. That's how I make pancakes. What I would propose is that we consider looking at this idea Instead of being black and white, good and evil, the best and worst, could it be an opportunity for what I like to think of as the shades of gray of dichotomy? You ever look closely at a quarter? If you turn it on its side, it's actually 3 layers. There's the 2 outer layers, like a little sandwich, and then there's another layer in the middle. That's to make it lighter, less expensive to produce, but it doesn't make it not a quarter, right? And those 2 sides are not oppositional. They're both making the same statement. I'm a quarter. Here I am, right? So in these shades of gray, this dichotomy, this distinction that may create a division, it might also not make a division as well, right? Some of that is in our willingness to potentially look at it in a different kind of way. That perspective allows for more room for discernment, new thoughts, different choices, and it may provide a way through and out with a different experience or outcome. I quite like that word, may, and not just because it's my last name, but also because it has a sense of possibilities in it. The story we've talked about more than a few times, the Zen farmer, may be good, may be bad, but there's potentiality in that, right? Not without an immense amount of what I like to think of spring fertility. Now in Unity, we try to make a practice of not letting our karma run over our dogma, right? I've been dying to use that for ages. And we don't have a lot of credo in Unity. We don't say you must believe a lot of certain things. But what do we say every Sunday, and hopefully more often? There is only one power and one presence active in my life and affairs. God the good, omnipotent. Now that's a strong statement of belief, right? Do we believe it? Do we really believe it? I don't think we just say it most of the time, although I have moments I don't act it. That's the other side of the coin. But if we do operate on the premise that we say that we really believe that our lives are guided by one power and presence, one force for good, how do we square that belief with the apparent duality that we just talked about in the Lenten journey? How do we square it with the rest of Dickens's quotation? You know, he went on from it's the best, it's the worst, all of this, and he went on to say, in short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on it being received, for good or for evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only. The period was so far like the present period. Remind you of anything? How do we square this idea of dichotomy as opposed to duality with the world we're currently living in? A world that seems so filled with the duality of politics, fear of the other, hypocrisy, dishonoring of our planet, unnecessary hunger and suffering, the deep longing of our life's journey for direction, and the desire to move beyond just getting through another day. Well, modern day science reminds us that nothing stays the same forever. 98% of our body's atoms are replaced every year. I was startled by that statistic. I'm 98% new. In 2019. Geologists have proven that no landscape stays permanently the same. Water, fog, steam, and ice are all the same thing, but at different stages and different temperatures. This challenging journey we call the resurrection is just another word for that change. Most particularly, we represent it in positive change, but which when looked at in the short run can seem like only death, only good and evil, only black and white. As a matter of fact, in the preface to the Catholic funeral liturgy, it says, life is not ended, but merely changed. Science now gives us helpful language for what those spiritual teachings have intuited and imaged with mythological language long ago. There's been an assumption, in our culture that myth means untrue somehow or made up. But myth at its root actually means things that are always and deeply true. The apparent duality in our resurrection journey actually provides a template for the hope and possibility of resurrection planted in our deepest unconscious and models the archetype for the entire pattern of creation. There's a reason we resonate with the story as deeply as we do, I believe, because it's in our DNA. The Easter story is a metaphor for what we experience repeatedly in our lives. And we have been telling and living this story because the pattern of the death, tomb, and resurrection resonate deep within us. As Unity Minister Reverend Ellen Debenport says, it reminds us that sometimes the worst events of our lives might be leading to good. I would even dare to add, are leading to good, are leading to God. So how do we embrace the possibilities of the dichotomy of the story? I need my glasses for this one. I wrote a note to myself without getting caught up in the duality of it. How do we embrace our own hero's journey, our own resurrection story? Well, when I was growing up, my mother used to call me the why kid. Why? I wanted to know that about everything. Now, I haven't lost my fondness for questions to this day, but what I've discovered is that there's a lot of more interesting questions than why. And one of the ways that I track myself on where I am and what I'm up to is to ask questions that are revealing. I propose there may be some very revealing questions we might want to ask ourselves on this journey. Am I willing to be worthy of the journey? Now, our own minister during the Lent series asked us about this. He said, a step on the path to spiritual enlightenment is to recognize we are worthy of the transformation. Meaning, whatever it is we're going through, no matter how trying it may be, we are inherently worthy of being lifted up and transformed by our experience. I think it's one of the most powerful concepts in our universal principles. Now, sometimes we might need to do a little bit of work, a little bit of cleanup work to feel that we're worthy. But in truth, that truth with a capital T, we are spiritual beings created in God's image, and therefore we are inherently good. Second question I sometimes ask myself, my multiple selves, am I willing to apply this same inherent worth to all living beings? Our minister also shared during the Lenten season that this shift from fear to faith is the journey that we have always been destined to take. We're not here by mistake. We were destined to take this journey as one together. The crucifixion simply represents that crossing out of our old error thinking, our ego self, to make way for the resurrection of the new self. Part of this is being willing to accept that not everyone's journey looks or feels the same, but it's still their journey, and it's mine to be respected. Third question I ask myself, have I chosen wisely my closest fellow travelers? Now, I'm standing up here and I'm thinking you guys look pretty good to me. There's great power in the collection and gathering together of those who are committed to co-creation with God. I know that personally for me, my greatest teachers and supporters have always been those who were willing to comfort me when I was afflicted and afflict me when I was too comfortable. A very good friend of mine, Paula, that some of you may know, is a good teacher for me in that way. I remember sharing with her one time that I was struggling, and I said, I've been doing this and I've been trying that, and I may be trying to impress her and myself with how busy I was about trying to get about my busyness. She said to me, well, have you tried sitting down and shutting up? Now, that's when you know that someone loves you enough to tell you what you truly needed to hear, because it was exactly what I needed to hear. Because I was too busy being busy to be quiet and still. Because we are creating our reality together, we want to be good stewards of our thoughts and actions, and that includes stewardship of our relationships as well. Sometimes that can require a little bit of cleanup work too, right? The fourth question I ask myself, am I willing to have an ongoing, committed spiritual practice to stay aligned in heart and mind with God? This can look like whatever it does for each of us individually, but continuing to ask this question reminds me to stay in the question of, is what I'm doing working for me? And am I working it? And quite frankly, sometimes the question I now ask myself, since Paula shared with me, is, do I need to sit down and shut up and listen to what Spirit has to say? Still both the external and the internal noise, and pay attention. The fifth question is, am I willing to show up and shine? It's not enough to know these spiritual principles. We must be prepared to answer that call when it's our time to live the truth we claim to know. I'm not doing anybody any favors if I play small. And I appreciate being called out to be my best self. This is truly love in action when we show up and shine. And serving others with our time and talents is an opportunity to further develop our own consciousness of oneness. Working together for the common good is the highest form of worship. And as such, it contributes to the upliftment of each and every one of us. If for some reason I find myself unwilling to share my talents, I tell myself to return to question number 1. Am I willing to be worthy? This archetype, modeled by the teachings of Jesus, may sometimes seem like the impossible dream. But for eons, the time of reaching for the moon was a symbol of the impossible dream. Oh, you're just reaching for the moon, people would say, right? Well, that was a valid response then, but not so much now. Someone began to see it, and then we were able to achieve it. As we discover more and more of our own divine potential, we realize that Jesus did what he did because he touched the dimension of life where all things are possible. It was to this dimension within each of us that Jesus pointed when he said, "All these things I do, you can do too, and more." Jesus demonstrated that divine law, revealing the divine potential within all persons, not just himself. I love the way Reverend Eric Butterworth always said it was that Jesus came not to impress us with his divinity, but to remind us of our own. Now, we all may have those things in our lives that seem to be beyond solutions, but we must not give up in the middle, even when it seems impossible. Some of you have heard me speak of my friend Walter, the farmer. I don't know Walter, really, but Walter writes letters, and he's a farmer in Ontario, Canada, And he writes letters to a local church, just giving them his perspectives on life about spirit and farming and showing up. And Walter the farmer says, "Now anyone who's lifted a finger knows the start of a task is easier than the end, but even the end is easier than the middle. When a man starts at plowing, his arms are fresh, the day is young, and his blade is sharp. When he rounds the corner to make his last turn, the hope of being done fills his step with an extra bounce. But in the middle, when the sun is hot and the blade loses its edge, and it's row after row after row, and you wonder how on earth you will ever get to the end. Now, nobody ever jumps for joy at having to weed their garden through the dog days of summer, but it must get done. And it's a whole lot easier to find your cucumbers if you do." So I say thank you to Walter for reminding us not to give up in the middle. When I was finalizing this talk and realizing that I wanted to both begin and end with gratitude, one of the things I realized was that a gratitude I had not anticipated was how this talk would be instructive in my own life in the present tense. I was talking to my partner Stephen the other day, and he said, "Do you mind if I don't go to church on Sunday?" I don't make him ever go to church, but I sometimes invite him when I'm speaking. And I said, "Well, I might be talking about you." And he said, "Yeah, I have some other things to do." And I was actually grateful that he was clear that this was not his place to be. And what it reminded me of is, if we are willing to not give up in the middle, if we're willing to make a commitment to wake up and to grow up and to clean up, and sometimes to shut up, and to not give up. If we just show up, life will bless us, and we will be grateful. Let's take these thoughts and take them into our meditation today.